Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a storm-drenched corner of Cornwall, 1839, where the sea claws at the cliffs and the Kennet House windows rattle like bones in the wind. You find yourself standing in a dining hall gone silent, except for the faint drip of seawater through the cracked ceiling. A candle still burns low, its wax spilling across linen stained dark as rust. At the far end of the table lies a body your mistress, her chest torn open in a pattern too deliberate to be random, blood soaking into the carved oak floorboards. Before you dive deeper into this chilling truth, consider hitting like and subscribing, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with the time and place you're watching, so I know you're still out there, and we'll dive into tonight's journey together. You notice the maid, Ada Beaumont, her dark skin glistening with sweat despite the cold. Her lips move, whispering a sequence of sounds you cannot place, neither English, nor Cornish, nor anything that belongs on this earth. 4 syllables. Pause. 4 syllables again. A rhythm almost like a heart that does not beat as yours does. She kneels in the blood, hands trembling yet precise, tracing symbols into the salt scattered on the floor as if compelled by something you cannot see. The storm outside builds to a howl, and for an instant, you think the house itself is answering her. The walls groan, the windows shiver, and in that moment, you realize this is not the scene of an ordinary crime. It is the beginning of something orchestrated, patterned, spoken into being through a language that was never meant for human throats. You step back from the blood-soaked dining hall, but your mind cannot leave Ada Beaumont. To understand what brought her here, you must return to the beginning, to the story of a girl who never truly belonged to the world that claimed her. Ada was born in 1817 in the dockside shadows of London, where ships unloaded sugar and cotton, while human cargo was spoken of only in hushed tones. Her mother, once enslaved in Jamaica, had crossed the Atlantic not as a traveler, but as property. By the time Ada came into the world, her mother had been discarded free, yet marked by chains no one could see. You can picture Ada's early days, soot-black alleys, the stink of fish markets, and the ever-present reminder that a girl with her skin was expected to stay silent, to keep her head low. From childhood, she carried an unsettling quietness. Other children babbled, cried, fought in the streets. Ada listened. She stared at their mouths, as though the words themselves were strange creatures worth dissecting. Neighbors whispered she could repeat phrases she had only overheard once, twisting them into patterns that didn't belong. By 10, she was hired as a scullery maid, hands raw from lye and salt water, but her memory for sound became her secret wealth. At night, she scrawled marks into soot along the chimney bricks, symbols that no teacher had ever shown her. The path to Kennet House began when Lady Eleanor Kennet visited London in 1831, a woman of means and sharp suspicion. She noticed Ada, not for her cleaning but for the way she recited a psalm backward when asked to repeat it. Something in that display, whether curiosity, cruelty, or design led Eleanor to bring Ada westward to Cornwall. And so Ada entered Kennet House, a coastal estate lashed by Atlantic winds. Its corridors lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow. Life there was a paradox. By day, you served alongside her scrubbing silver, beating rugs, preparing meals for the household and their occasional guests. Orders came sharp and constant. The mistress demanded silence unless addressed, and Ada excelled at silence. Yet, when the rest of the staff retired to their attic quarters, you often found her alone near the hearth, drawing again on slate and ash, whispering to herself in tones that hummed like music and broke like glass. The others noticed. Cook muttered that she was touched by the devil. Footman James swore he saw her lips move when no sound came. Yet the chandelier above the hall trembled as if to answer her. Rumors spread that she spoke in tongues, though no priest could place the words. You yourself grew uneasy, not because of malice in her gaze, but because of the strange detachment. She seemed both here and elsewhere, as though every sound carried her mind across invisible thresholds. By the winter of 1838, the household had shifted. Supplies grew scarce. Storms made travel dangerous, and isolation gnawed at tempers. Eleanor Kennet herself had grown obsessed with records. Notebooks filled with archaic symbols, and her nightly lessons with Ada stretched late into candle hours. You sometimes overheard fragments, Eleanor demanding repetition, Ada's voice rising into patterns that didn't match human cadence. One evening, you glimpsed them in the library, Ada's hand steady as she drew circles within squares, Eleanor smiling with something like hunger. The dissonance in Ada's character deepened. To the untrained eye, she was obedient, moving with quiet grace through her chores. But you saw what others missed, the way her eyes flicked to corners no one else noticed, the way she paused at windows when the wind shifted, mouthing syllables as though translating the storm itself. It was as though she existed between servitude and something far stranger, an unwilling vessel for knowledge she never sought. Villagers in Port Harrow began whispering, too. When Ada accompanied Eleanor to market, fishermen crossed themselves. A boy claimed she counted his marbles in a language that made his head ache for days. A woman swore her newborn stopped crying when Ada hummed to him, only to wake with fever that very night. Gossip crawled across the village, branding Ada not merely an outsider, but a danger. The tension inside Kennet House thickened. You noticed the patterns repeating Eleanor's appetite for symbols, Ada's exhausted compliance, the staff's fearful avoidance. More than once, you found Ada staring into the hearth, lips trembling as though words fought to escape her throat. When you asked what troubled her, she looked at you with those wide, unblinking eyes and whispered "for," just that single word, nothing more. The unease of her presence seeped into your bones. You began to wonder whether the murders to come were written long before they happened, scripted in the symbols Ada carved on walls, spoken in the syllables she could not suppress. She was no ordinary maid, no ordinary servant. She was a fracture in the world itself, carrying within her a language that threatened to split open everything you thought you knew. And when the first blood spilled, you would remember her origins not as explanation, but as omen. The first murder unfolded not with warning, but with a rhythm that seemed rehearsed, as though Ada's whispers had been building to this exact night. You remember the gale that shook Kennet House, rattling shutters and pushing salt spray through the cracks. Inside, Lady Eleanor had ordered a late supper in the dining hall: oysters, venison, wine heavy as blood. The staff moved quickly, all eager to return to their quarters before the storm worsened, but Ada lingered. You recall her pale apron soaked with seawater, though she hadn't left the house, her fingers twitching as though each joint remembered some silent command. When Eleanor dismissed the staff, you remained behind to collect the trays. That was when you saw it, Ada standing stiff at the doorway, lips moving in cadence with the howling wind. Eleanor snapped at her. Enough of your nonsense, but the words seemed to feed Ada instead of silencing her. The candles dimmed, the fire hissed low, and in that dim half-light, Eleanor Kennet clutched her chest as if an invisible hand had pierced it. She collapsed across the table, her blood spilling into the wine, mingling in grotesque communion. You froze. The body did not fall naturally. The gash across her sternum had shape, almost geometric, blood arranged in 4 symmetrical rivulets along the carved oak floorboards. Ada did not scream, nor did she rush to help. She walked forward, calm, as if she had been waiting for this. Kneeling beside her mistress, she whispered a sequence of sounds that defied your understanding. 4 syllables. Pause. 4 more. The cadence of a heartbeat that belonged to something inhuman. You wanted to step in, to call for help, but the storm's roar seemed to smother your own breath. The seconds dragged. Eleanor's eyes rolled back, her lips trembling, but she made no plea. You expected death to end the sound in Ada's throat. Instead, the chant grew stronger. Ada's hand traced lines in the blood, shaping symbols that gleamed under candlelight like they carried their own fire. It was not frenzy, it was precision. Every movement calculated, every syllable purposeful, as though she were completing a script written long before her birth. You staggered back, heart pounding, unsure if you were watching a murder, a ritual, or both. The storm outside seemed to echo her cadence, thunder answering her voice. For an instant, you felt that Kennet House itself had become a vessel for something vast and unseen. When silence finally returned, it was absolute. Eleanor Kennet lay motionless. Blood pooled neat as ink, and Ada's whisper faded into nothing. She looked up at you then, eyes reflecting candlelight with unnatural brilliance, and said only one word: 4. The terror of that night lingered long after the body was covered. The staff whispered of poison, of hidden knives, of curses carried across the sea. But you knew what you had seen. There was no blade in Ada's hands, no bottle near her lips. The wound itself defied explanation, as if the flesh had obeyed the rhythm of her chant rather than the strike of any weapon. In the days that followed, the house grew colder despite roaring fires. You found yourself tracing the dried blood on the floor, noticing how the rivulets had dried in straight, deliberate lines. At night, you heard Ada's voice through the walls, soft at first, then rising until it nearly merged with the storm outside. Each time she spoke, you felt a pressure in your chest, as if your own heart wanted to follow her impossible rhythm. The others tried to explain it away. Cook insisted Eleanor had suffered some rare seizure. James whispered that Ada had poisoned her wine with ground glass. Yet neither theory accounted for the precision of the wounds, nor the symbols left in blood. You alone carried the truth, whatever Ada spoke that night. It did not come from any human language. You began watching her more closely. She carried on with her duties, fetching water, sweeping corridors, serving meals, with the same quiet obedience as before. But you noticed her fingers twitching when she passed the library door, her lips forming shapes without sound when she entered the cellar. She seemed caught between two worlds, one where she was a servant, another where she was the mouthpiece of something that had claimed her. One evening, unable to restrain your fear, you confronted her in the scullery. What did you say? That night you asked. Ada's gaze met yours, calm but unyielding. I didn't speak, she whispered. It spoke through me. Her words left you colder than the draft sweeping through the stone walls. You wanted to believe she was lying, that grief or guilt had driven her mad. But the conviction in her tone, the serenity in her face, told you otherwise. She was not boasting. She was confessing. That confession became the weight you carried as the days darkened further. Eleanor's body was buried quickly, the death attributed to natural causes for the sake of the Kennet family's name. But no earth could cover what you had witnessed. You lay awake, haunted by the memory of Ada's chant, of Eleanor's blood arranging itself in patterns too clean, too deliberate to be random. And then came the drawings. One morning, you entered the kitchen to find scraps of parchment scattered across the table. Charcoal marks covered them, circles intersecting, lines converging, 4 repeating nodes. They looked less like sketches and more like diagrams, though of what you couldn't say. When Ada entered, she gathered them quickly, but not before you saw a pattern repeated across each, a heart divided into 4 chambers, each chamber marked with a symbol not of this earth. You realized then that Eleanor's death had not been an accident, nor even a single crime. It was the first note in a composition that had already begun. Ada was not finished, and neither, it seemed, was the language that moved through her. You hoped, perhaps foolishly, that Eleanor Kennet's death would be the end of it, that with her gone, the storm within Kennet House might finally quiet. But it did not. What happened next proved the opposite. Eleanor's death was not the climax, but the opening act. The second body was discovered 3 nights later. The house had been restless, the servants whispering about dismissal, about whether the estate would even survive without its mistress. Yet routine continued. Supper was served, floors swept, silver polished. That night, the head steward, Mr. Dalton, remained late in the study, reviewing accounts. When you were sent to fetch him, you opened the door to find him slumped over the desk. At first, you thought he had merely fallen asleep, until you saw the ink spreading across the papers was not black, but crimson. His chest bore 4 deep slashes, arranged in perfect symmetry, radiating outward like compass points. His spectacles lay unbroken beside him. No struggle, no overturned chair, just the same chilling precision you had seen in Eleanor's blood. Ada was there. She always was. Standing in the corner, her apron flecked with ink and blood, her lips moving silently as her eyes locked on yours. 4 syllables. Pause. 4 again. You could not hear the sound, yet you felt it in your bones, the way one feels a storm before it arrives. The staff panicked. Some fled the estate that very night, clutching belongings and muttering prayers. Cook swore she would never again set foot in a house where death walked the halls. But those who remained were bound by necessity, you among them. And so you witnessed the pattern unfold. The third victim was the cook herself. 2 days after Dalton's death, she was found in the kitchen, sprawled against the hearthstones, her body charred as though the fire had flared unnaturally hot. Yet the firewood was untouched, still stacked neatly. Her skin bore the faint etchings of symbols you had seen Ada draw in ash, as if the heat had branded her with an alphabet not meant for this world. Then came the messenger boy, 14 years old, a local lad who delivered parcels from the village. He was discovered near the servants' entrance, throat cut so cleanly it looked carved by a surgeon's hand. His satchel lay beside him, unopened, letters untouched. On the flagstones around his body, salt had been scattered in 4 small piles, forming a cross. Each time, the number 4 returned 4 wounds, 4 symbols, 4 piles of salt. Each death grew stranger, more ritualistic. And each time, Ada was near. You could no longer dismiss it as coincidence. What unsettled you most was her demeanor. She did not run, did not hide, did not plead innocence. She continued her duties with eerie calm, sweeping the same corridors, serving the same meals, all while whispering to herself in that impossible tongue. When confronted, she denied nothing. Yet she admitted nothing either. It was as if she no longer lived within the same frame of reality as you. The villagers noticed, too. Rumors spread through Port Harrow of curses, of a servant girl conjuring storms. Fishermen swore the sea grew violent when she visited the market. Children whispered that if you counted to 4 in the dark, you could hear her voice whispering back. The authorities should have intervened. But when a constable finally visited, he left shaken and silent, refusing to file a report. You overheard him mutter to the innkeeper later, "She looked at me, and I forgot my own name." As the bodies mounted, you began to recognize the rhythm of terror itself. Death arrived not randomly, but in sequence, building like a composition. You could almost predict it. The nights grew heavier, the air thicker, Ada's whispers sharper. You counted the days, knowing another life would soon be claimed, helpless to prevent it. And yet, a part of you wondered, was Ada the executioner, or merely the instrument? Her eyes often seemed hollow, her body trembling after each death, as though drained by forces she could not resist. You saw her in the stables one night, sobbing quietly, clutching her chest, as though her own heart had been bound by that impossible rhythm. When she noticed you, she whispered, "It wants more." The killings escalated, each more grotesque than the last. In the cellar, a maid was found suspended from iron hooks, her organs removed and arranged on the floor in 4 neat piles. In the library, a guest who had come to settle Eleanor's estate was discovered with his skull caved in, though no weapon was ever found. Across his forehead, drawn in his own blood, was the same looping symbol Ada had once carved into soot. You tried to keep count, but the pattern blurred into nightmare. Each new body carried the signature 4 marks, 4 symbols, 4 elements aligned. The staff dwindled. Rooms were left uncleaned, meals unprepared. Kennet House itself seemed to decay, its windows cracked, its walls damp with the smell of salt and blood. Through it all, Ada endured silent, spectral, a vessel for whatever force commanded her. She grew thinner, her skin ashen, but her eyes glowed more fiercely with each passing night. She was no longer simply a maid. She had become something else entirely, a herald of death, bound to a language that demanded sacrifice. And you, trapped in that house, knew the pattern would not end until it consumed everyone within reach. The house had become a tomb, yet the authorities treated it as nothing more than a crumbling estate cursed by misfortune. You knew better. You had seen the patterns, heard the whispers, felt the rhythm in your own chest at night when Ada spoke through the walls. Still, the outside world demanded explanations, and so the investigation began, if it could even be called that. Inspector Rook arrived from Truro with a small retinue, a man with a sharp mustache and sharper arrogance. He paced the halls of Kennet House, dismissing the rumors of rituals and curses, coincidence and hysteria. He muttered, scribbling in his notebook. He measured bloodstains with a ruler, tapped walls with his cane, and declared that Eleanor's death was a seizure, Dalton's wounds the work of a knife, the cook's burns a mere accident. Each theory was thinner than the paper he wrote them on. You wanted to scream at him, to show him the symbols, the salt, the chant that seemed to seep through every floorboard, but when you tried, his eyes hardened. You've been too long in this house. You see ghosts where there are none. Ghosts. The word lingered, because whether or not Ada killed with her own hands, you could no longer shake the feeling that something unseen stalked the corridors. You began hearing voices at night, not just Ada's murmurs, but whispers that rose from the walls themselves. Sometimes they carried your name. Sometimes they carried no words at all, just the sound of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 repeated until your skin crawled. Witness accounts fared no better. James, the footman who survived the first wave of killings, swore he had seen shadows moving independently of the firelight. Yet when pressed by Inspector Rook, he faltered, describing instead a trick of the eyes. Another servant claimed Ada's lips moved without sound, though her eyes rolled white, as if something else spoke through her. Rook sneered at this testimony, chalking it up to hysteria. Each witness contradicted the last, their fear diluting into nonsense under the inspector's impatient questioning. But you knew they weren't lying. you had seen the contradictions yourself. Ada's lips moving without voice, the chandelier swaying when no wind stirred, the sudden weight in your chest as though an invisible hand pressed down. Rook collected testimonies, then dismissed them all, declaring the case closed for lack of evidence. Yet clues remained, stubborn as scars. You found them in the most ordinary places, faint chalk marks beneath the dining table, salt crystals hidden in the hems of Ada's apron, charcoal diagrams tucked between pages of account books. Each clue pointed to deliberate structure, a design so precise it mocked coincidence. You began collecting them in secret, sketching them in your own notebook. Circles intersecting lines, 4 nodes always repeating, a map, perhaps, or a sentence waiting to be completed. The investigation should have ended there, strangled by incompetence. But then came the constable who vanished, sent to guard the house overnight. He was posted at the main door. By dawn, he was gone, his lantern found extinguished at the threshold. In his place were 4 small piles of ash, arranged in a square. Rook dismissed it as desertion, claiming the constable had fled his post. But you recognized the pattern. You had seen those piles before, around the messenger boy's corpse. Rumors grew wilder. Villagers swore Kennet House glowed at night, its windows flickering with blue light, though no lamps burned inside. Others claimed they heard voices carried on the sea wind, chanting in a tongue that made their bones ache. The investigation became a parody of itself, official reports stamped with seals, while everyone whispered of curses behind closed doors. And then there were the omens. One night, you dreamed of Ada standing at the foot of your bed, her eyes luminous in the dark. She spoke a word you did not know. Yet when you woke, you found it written on your palm in soot. Another time, you heard the cries of the cook echoing through the kitchen long after her body had been buried. The cries were not grief, but warning, 4 sharp wails, followed by silence. You tried to tell yourself these were hallucinations, the byproduct of fear and sleepless nights. But when you showed your palm to Ada, she traced the word with her finger and whispered, "It's learning you." That was when you realized the investigation was not about uncovering the truth. It was about containing it. Inspector Rook's arrogance masked fear, and his insistence on silence revealed more than his words. He knew something, or someone, wanted the case buried. You began to notice his visits with Ada. He forbade the staff from entering the study when he questioned her. But you listened through the door. You heard him demand repetition, heard Ada's voice rise and break, the cadence of 4 syllables at a time. Sometimes you heard his voice join hers, stumbling at first, then growing smoother, as if he, too, was learning. The realization chilled you more than any corpse had. The investigation was not failing, it was evolving. And Rook was no longer an inspector. He was a participant. You started doubting your own safety. Every hallway felt watched. Every mirror seemed to shift when you weren't looking. At night, when Ada's voice filled the walls, you sometimes heard a second voice layered over hers deeper, mechanical, ancient. You pressed your hands to your ears, but the sound lived inside your skull. Clues, contradictions, incompetence, omens, each thread wove into something larger than a criminal inquiry. This was not justice. This was contagion. The language itself was spreading, infecting minds, rewriting loyalty, and you were next. You had clung to the thought that Ada was the killer, that if she could be stopped, the nightmare would end. But in the weeks that followed, you discovered a truth more poisonous. Ada was never the author. She was the instrument. The revelation came in the hallowed dark of the cellars, where mildew clung to the stones and salt bit at your throat. You descended by candlelight, following faint scratches in the wall that looked like Ada's symbols. The air grew colder with each step, the silence heavy as water. Then, behind a row of barrels, you found a door you had never noticed ironbound, sealed with rusted chains. The lock was already broken. Inside was a chamber you should never have seen. The walls were coated in chalk markings, hundreds of symbols repeated in endless variation. In the center stood a lectern, its wood blackened with age, and upon it lay a ledger bearing Eleanor Kennet's hand. You flipped the brittle pages, your heart hammering, and realized the truth. Lady Eleanor had not been a victim. She had been a practitioner. For years, she had collected fragments of languages, pieced together scripts from travelers and scholars, and experimented on Ada as if she were a vessel to test theories too dangerous for her own tongue. The ledger's entries were chilling. Subject demonstrates capacity beyond human pattern. Vocal cords endure greater strain. Control possible if rhythm repeated. Each note was clinical, detached, as though Eleanor had never viewed Ada as human at all. And in the margins, you saw something worse. Inspector Rook's handwriting, his own notes scribbled beside Eleanor's. He had been visiting Kennet House long before the murders began. The room reeked of secrecy, of collusion. Ada had been groomed not by chance, not by curse, but by deliberate design. Eleanor and Rook had molded her into a conduit, a channel for something older than scripture, older than words themselves. And when Eleanor died, the current of that language did not die with her. It shifted, seeking another host. You staggered back from the ledger, bile in your throat. All this time, Ada had not been killing of her own will. She had been used, her voice twisted into a blade by others. The symbols, the salt, the patterns of four, they were not hers. They were the architecture of something Eleanor and Rook had conjured. Something now too strong to be caged. That night, you confronted Ada in the corridor. She looked exhausted, her skin translucent, her lips cracked from endless murmurs. You asked her whose voice spoke through her. She shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "Not mine," she whispered. "Never mine. They wrote it into me." And now it writes itself. Your stomach turned as realization pierced you. The language was not just a code. It was a parasite. It fed on her lungs, her throat, her mind, and Rook Inspector in name only was no longer investigating but feeding it, drawing power from its rhythm. You saw the change in him. His speech grew clipped, cadenced, every fourth word carrying a strange weight. His eyes flickered with the same unnatural light you had once seen only in Ada's. And during one late-night walk through the halls, you caught him standing alone in the study, whispering syllables into the mirror, his reflection lagging behind like a puppet out of sync. The true killer had been revealed not in flesh, not in blade, but in intent. Eleanor and Rook had opened the door, and Ada had been forced to stand at its threshold. The deaths were not murders for their own sake. They were offerings. Each body part of a sequence meant to anchor the language into this world. The worst part, it was working. You felt it in the air itself. The way silence no longer seemed empty, but crowded, filled with echoes of unspoken words. You saw it in the staff who remained, their sentences stumbling, their eyes glassy as though their thoughts were being rearranged. Some began humming without realizing it, a tune of 4 beats, followed by silence. Even you found yourself mouthing syllables in your sleep, waking with your jaw aching as though you'd been speaking all night. The truth was undeniable. Kennet House was no longer simply haunted by crime. It was a hive, buzzing with a language that replicated itself, colonizing minds. Ada had been the first host, Eleanor the architect, Rook the willing disciple, and now you, an unwilling witness, were being drawn in. The twist unraveled with the cruelty of inevitability. Ada was not guilty. She was condemned. The true malice lay in the hands of those who had turned her into a mouthpiece for something beyond human. The murders were not hers, but theirs, orchestrated through her body, her blood, her breath, and still, even after uncovering the truth, you could not escape the cadence of 4. It was in your heartbeat, in the creak of the house, in the crashing of the waves against the cliff. It followed you everywhere, whispering that you were next. You thought the revelation in the cellar would free you, that naming the truth would break its hold. But truth is not freedom. It is a chain that binds tighter the more you pull. The killings slowed, but the silence was worse. Ada no longer fought the voice. She surrendered. You found her on the cliff's edge one dawn, her gown soaked by sea spray, whispering to the horizon as if reporting to something far beyond sight. Rook stood behind her, eyes fixed on the same horizon, lips moving in tandem with hers. In that moment, you understood the two of them were no longer separate. They were conduits, vessels in harmony with the rhythm that had infected Kennet House. The estate emptied. Those who had not fled were consumed by death, by madness, or by the language itself. You wandered rooms where blood still stained the floorboards, where salt piles lingered like the footprints of ghosts. Each space hummed faintly, as though the house itself had learned to speak. The final night came without ceremony. The storm raged again, windows shaking, walls groaning. You found Ada in the dining hall where it had all begun, her hands outstretched, voice spilling syllables that bent the very air. The chandelier swung, though no wind touched it. Shadows crawled across the walls. stretching into forms that did not belong to any human figure. She looked at you once, eyes luminous and utterly hollow, and whispered, "It's in you now." You staggered back, breath catching, as the symbols carved themselves into your vision, whether on the walls, the floor, or the inside of your skull. You could no longer tell. Rook's voice joined hers, deeper, steady, forming the cadence of 4. You realized too late that the murders were never meant to end. They were the overture. The real composition was you. When dawn broke, Ada and Rook were gone. No bodies, no footprints, only silence, broken by the rhythm of the sea crashing against the cliffs. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now, even as you leave Kennet House behind, the rhythm follows. You hear it in the tick of your clock, in the drip of water, in your own heart. You cannot escape it. Perhaps you never will. So I'll ask you, right now when you turn off this video and sit in the quiet of your room, what if the silence answers back? What if you hear 4 knocks at your door, steady and deliberate, carrying the same cadence that claimed Kennet House? Before you risk finding out, hit subscribe, drop a comment with where and when you're watching, so I know you're still resisting the rhythm. And remember, some voices don't wait to be invited. They're already in your head.